Imagine walking into your parents' house, the familiar scent of homemade lasagna wafting through the air, a dish your mom promised would make the evening special, luring you back home with the promise of warmth and family. You sit down at the dining table, expecting a night filled with love, laughter, and maybe a few nostalgic stories, only to have that illusion shattered in an instant by the cold, smug voice of your younger brother, Ethan, cutting through the room like a knife. He leaned forward, arrogance practically dripping from every word, and declared that everything, the house you grew up in, the cherished lake cottage, every single asset in Linda and Richard's will, was going to him and my twin sister Chloe, leaving me with nothing. His words crashed into me like a sucker punch, knocking the wind out of me, and that lasagna, once a symbol of comfort, turned into a heavy, bitter weight in my stomach. The dining room fell into a suffocating silence, broken only by the distant hum of traffic filtering in from the suburban street outside, a sound that felt miles away from the chaos erupting inside me. My heart started pounding, a frantic rhythm echoing in my ears as I looked across the polished cherrywood table at Ethan and Chloe, their faces now twisted with smirks, their eyes glinting with a self-satisfied glow that made my skin crawl. I managed to choke out a question, asking what they meant by everything, my voice trembling despite every effort to hold it steady, desperate for some clarity in the storm of betrayal swirling around me. That's when Linda jumped in, her tone sharp and cutting, her usual warm smile replaced by a defiant, almost challenging set of her lips, announcing that she and Richard had finalized their will and wanted me to hear it straight from them. The house, the lake cottage, every last piece of their legacy was signed over to Ethan and Chloe, and I was left out in the cold. I turned to Richard, my eyes pleading for some sign of hesitation, a flicker of doubt, anything to suggest this was a cruel misunderstanding or a twisted joke, but he wouldn't meet my gaze. His focus locked on the silverware in front of him, as if it held all the answers I was begging for. The silence that followed stretched on, thick and unbearable, until he finally spoke, his voice low and carefully controlled, saying I'd done so well for myself, that they were proud of my career and the success I'd built, but Ethan and Chloe were still finding their footing, and they needed more support, implying I didn't. I blinked hard, pushing back the sting of tears. For years, I'd quietly carried the family's financial load, their house payments, Ethan's constant tuition changes, Chloe's whims and expensive hobbies, all paid by me, thinking it was my duty as the oldest kid. Apparently, none of it mattered. My heart twisted bitterly as I looked at my parents' hardened faces, the betrayal cutting deeper than I'd ever expected. I demanded if this was my reward for spending the last 4 years paying their mortgage, covering tuition bills, and dropping $30,000 into renovating that lake cottage last summer, leaving me nothing because I'd built something for myself. Linda sighed dramatically, shaking her head, saying this was exactly why they didn't want to tell me, that I always made it about money and it was never about family with me. Heat rushed to my cheeks, my fists clenched under the tablecloth as I shot back that it was always about family for me. Every sacrifice I'd made was because of family, because they asked, because they said family sticks together. Ethan scoffed, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms smugly, saying I was acting like some martyr and nobody made me help, that I just liked playing the hero. Chloe laughed softly, twirling a strand of her shiny hair around one finger. Her eyes narrowed with amusement as she said, "Maybe I thought if I threw enough money at them, Linda and Richard would finally love me as much as they loved them." The harshness of her words hit deep, reopening a wound I'd spent years pretending wasn't there. My parents didn't react, didn't call her out, and their silence screamed louder than any defense they could have given. Anger burned through me, torching the last bits of patience I had left. I said they were right. No one forced me, but starting today, no one could guilt me into being this family's ATM either. I was done. I shoved my chair back and stood suddenly, ignoring the shocked looks on their faces. For a second, the smell of marinara and baked garlic hung in the air, a bitter reminder of what I'd stupidly hoped would be a cozy family night. Instead, I'd been blindsided, humiliated, and rejected in the same home I'd helped pay for. As I grabbed my coat from the hallway, the front door slammed shut behind me with a solid thud, cutting me off from the voices inside, voices that didn't matter anymore. Outside, the cool Portland air hit me hard, clearing my head, but my heart still felt raw, throbbing with disbelief. My own family had used me, thrown me away, and left me feeling worthless. I climbed into my car, slammed the door shut, and gripped the steering wheel with shaky hands as tears finally spilled down my face. During the quiet, lonely drive back to my downtown apartment, memories flooded my mind. Every financial sacrifice, every canceled vacation, every night I'd stayed up juggling spreadsheets and payments to keep them comfortable, all done quietly, without complaint, out of a misguided sense of love and duty. How naive I'd been, thinking my efforts were appreciated, let alone valued. Back home, my apartment felt oddly unfamiliar, like everything around me was stained by this truth. I poured myself a big glass of Cabernet, the pricey one I'd saved for special occasions, and somehow tonight's harsh lesson felt fitting enough. Settling onto my couch, I opened my banking app. The recurring monthly payments, $1,800 labeled parents' mortgage, another $600 for their utility bills, stared back at me like a taunt. Without a second thought, I canceled them both, a quiet defiance bubbling up in my chest as the confirmations popped up. As the evening slipped into night, I replayed the dinner conversation over and over, my anger fading into deep sadness. The rejection wasn't just about money, it was emotional. A lifetime of feeling second best finally laid bare. Yet, even in the pain, something new stirred inside me, a sense of freedom, a realization that my worth didn't hinge on their approval. It was time to take back my life, free from expectations and obligations that had chained me down. I knew Linda, Richard, Ethan, and Chloe wouldn't let this go quietly. There'd be calls, fights, maybe even payback. But tonight was a turning point. No matter how hard they pushed back, I silently swore to myself that I was done being their doormat, done swallowing disrespect under the excuse of duty. From now on, my life was mine. As I finished the last sip of wine, I found myself smiling bitterly into the dark. My family had invited me home to announce they'd left everything to Ethan and Chloe, but they'd handed me something way more valuable tonight: freedom. Sleep dodged me that night. I stared up at the shadowy ceiling of my apartment, my mind caught in an endless loop of disbelief, hurt, and anger. The city lights outside flickered softly through my curtains, uncaring about the storm raging inside me. Every time I closed my eyes, I relived those humiliating moments around the dinner table. Ethan's smug grin, Chloe's amused contempt, and worst of all, the cold silence from Linda and Richard. Their silence sliced deeper than my siblings' sharp words ever could. By sunrise, exhaustion had wrung me dry of tears. I dragged myself out of bed, brewed strong coffee, and sat numbly at my kitchen table. The morning news hummed faintly in the background, but I wasn't listening. Instead, memories pressed in from every angle, relentless and clear. Had I been blind all these years? Or had I chosen to ignore the signs, desperate to believe my family cared about me beyond the financial safety I gave them? My phone buzzed suddenly, rattling hard against the wooden table. It was Linda. My stomach knotted up, and I let it go to voicemail, not ready, or maybe not able, to hear her voice yet. A minute later, the voicemail notification blinked at me. Against my better sense, I played it. Her voice rang out with that familiar blend of frustration and guilt, telling me to stop being so dramatic and call her back, that family doesn't treat each other like this. A hollow laugh slipped out. How ironic. Family, her go-to tool for emotional blackmail. Family only mattered when it suited their needs, never mine. I deleted the message and set the phone aside, set on not buckling under her well-worn guilt trips. Over the next few days, the calls piled up. First Linda, then Richard, and finally Ethan and Chloe jumped in, switching between smug lectures and sarcastic begging. But none of them showed even a hint of regret, just growing annoyance that their cash flow had dried up. Finally, after a nasty call from Chloe accusing me of selfishness and jealousy, I blocked them all. Peace settled over me for the first time in years, fragile and strange, yet beneath the calm relief, a dull, nagging ache lingered, one I wasn't sure would ever fully leave. I threw myself into work to keep my mind off it. Ben at Construction's latest project, a sleek medical office complex in Sacramento, took all my focus. Meetings, blueprints, client walkthroughs, all stuff I'd always handled smoothly, now felt like frantic escapes from the reality waiting outside work hours. I stretched my work days, signed up for extra travel, anything to put off facing the quiet of my empty evenings. 3 weeks went by without a word from my family. I started cautiously hoping they'd accepted my choice and moved on. But deep down, I knew better. It was a Friday afternoon when the text popped up, flashing darkly across my screen. A family meeting tonight, saying I owed it to them to show up. My heart sped up as I stared at it, disbelief clashing with outrage. I didn't owe them a thing, not anymore, but curiosity, maybe mixed with a dumb hope for some kind of making up, ate at me. Before I could think too hard, my fingers typed a one-word reply. Fine. Pulling into my parents' driveway that evening felt unreal. Ethan's flashy motorcycle and Chloe's loud blue Kia were already there, parked side by side like twin badges of entitlement. Dread coiled tight in my gut as I walked up to the familiar front door, now feeling as strange and hostile as an enemy's turf. Linda opened the door, her fake smile barely hiding her irritation, saying she was glad I'd decided to come. She led me into the house I once called home. Aunt Clara was there too, sitting quietly in the corner of the living room, her eyes warm with sympathy but cautious. Her being there threw me off. She hardly ever got mixed up in family fights. I sat across from her, heart pounding as my siblings walked in, glaring at me openly. Richard cleared his throat and started firmly, saying they'd called this meeting to clear the air, that he and Linda thought I'd come to my senses by now, but clearly they were wrong. I held back a sharp comeback, clenching my fists tight as I asked what sense they expected me to come to. They'd cut me out completely after all I'd done, every mortgage payment, every tuition check. Linda snapped, rolling her eyes, saying I was blowing it out of proportion, that I'd helped, sure, but it was my job as the oldest, and Ethan and Chloe deserved stability. It wasn't their fault I picked work over family. A bitter laugh burst out as I repeated her words in disbelief. I picked work over family? I'd built my career because they needed my money, gave up vacations, friendships, relationships, all to keep up their fake sense of security. Ethan scoffed, telling me to spare them the drama, that they never asked for my pity handouts. Chloe sneered that maybe if I weren't so busy playing family savior, I'd have my own life by now. Heat flooded my face, humiliation swelling painfully under my skin. Aunt Clara shifted uncomfortably, but stayed quiet, her silence loud as a shout. My parents stayed silent, faces hard, eyes turned away from me again. I stood up fast, my chair scraping rough across the hardwood floor, and said they were right. It was my mistake to think I mattered here, and I wouldn't make it again. As I reached the door, Richard's voice sliced sharply behind me, warning that if I walked out now, I shouldn't expect to be welcomed back. I stopped, hand on the doorknob, years of buried anger boiling up. I replied coldly that it was fine. I'd never felt welcome here anyway. Outside, under the cold stars, tears burned hot paths down my cheeks. Each step to my car felt heavier than the last, the truth sinking in. My family never really valued me. I was just convenient, disposable, replaceable. At home, I locked my apartment door tight behind me, set on never letting them hurt me again. I sat in the dark, the silence now oddly soothing, wrapping around me like a shield. A soft knock on my door jolted me, adrenaline rushing through me. I peeked through the peephole. Aunt Clara stood there, worry carved deep into her face. I opened the door and let her in without a word. She hugged me right away, warmth and comfort pouring from her gentle grip. She whispered that she was sorry, that they were wrong, and I deserved so much better. Her words broke something in me, and the tears I'd held back poured out. She held me tight, letting me let go of years of built-up pain and bitterness. After a long quiet, she spoke again, her voice firm with belief, saying they'd never admit it. But they were scared of losing control, of facing their screw-ups. For years, the recurring payments had stared back at me like quiet accusations. I'd earned $100 for my parents' mortgage, $600 for utilities and bills, plus tons of random transfers just labeled family help. My cursor hovered over the cancel button, my breath short and shaky. Despite my anger and shame, guilt twisted hard in my gut, whispering old lies about responsibility and duty. I paused, Linda's voice echoing in my head. Family sticks together, family sacrifices. But tonight had ripped away all illusions. Their betrayal, cold and careless, showed the hard truth. I'd become nothing more than their money machine. I shut my eyes tight, Ethan's mocking smirk flashing clear in my memory, locking in my choice with painful sharpness. With one firm click, the mortgage payment was gone. Another click, and the utilities payment stopped too. Relief hit me hard, a rush so strong it left me breathless. For the first time in years, I wasn't their lifeline. The chains were finally off. Exhaustion took over eventually, and when I woke up on the couch, dawn had softened Portland's skyline into shades of pale lavender and gold. My phone buzzed nonstop, snapping me awake. Dread pooled fast in my stomach. Sure enough, it was Linda's name flashing on the screen. I took a deep breath before answering. She demanded to know what I'd done, skipping any hello, her voice shaking with fury. The bank had called, threatening foreclosure. She said I had no right. I cut in, my voice oddly calm, saying I'd paid their mortgage by choice. But after what went down, I was done being their cash cow. She yelled that I was their daughter, that I owed them respect. I fired back that I owed them nothing. Respect goes both ways. They made their call, and now I'd made mine. She started again, desperation creeping into her tone, but I shut her down firm, saying I was sorry she was upset, but I couldn't do this anymore, and hung up fast, my hands trembling. The calls kept coming, each one from Richard, Chloe, Even far-off relatives was a non-stop try to manipulate, guilt trip, or shame me back into line. Eventually, I muted my phone, feeling weirdly strong from the quiet defiance. Weeks passed, and life slowly found its footing. Work turned into more than just a distraction. It felt rewarding again. I booked that Italy trip I'd dreamed of for years, loving the freedom to finally spend my hard-earned cash on myself. A new sense of independence filled my days, though loneliness sometimes snuck in at night, a harsh reminder of family ties cut loose. Then came Sacramento, a 3-day trip to check final inspections at our newest medical complex project. The gig felt perfectly timed, a solid break from lingering sadness and family mess. Getting back late on a Friday night, tiredness weighed heavy on my shoulders as I walked up to my apartment door, luggage dragging behind me. But something was off. The closer I got, the clearer it became. Thick, hardened foam spilling out around my doorframe. My stomach sank. My apartment was sealed tight. Heart racing, I touched the foam. It was dry and solid, deliberately sprayed into every gap, making sure I couldn't get in. Panic surged, then anger took over fast. Only one person came to mind who'd pull such a cruel, petty stunt. Ethan. I called building management right away, pacing like crazy. After hours of waiting in the hallway, a tired locksmith showed up, shaking his head with pity at the mess. He chipped away at the foam, muttering about how intentional it was. "Someone really didn't want me inside," he said grimly. My blood boiled thinking of Ethan's smug grin as he sealed my door shut, punishing me for standing up for myself. By the time the locksmith was done, it was almost midnight. Inside, adrenaline kept me wired, anger burning too hot for sleep. Sitting at my computer, I remembered my hallway security camera. Heart pounding, I pulled up the footage, hunting anxiously until a familiar shape popped up. There he was. Ethan, baseball cap low, hoodie hiding his face, but definitely him. My stomach twisted as I watched him methodically wreck my door, his face lit up with cruel glee. Betrayal hit harder now, fresh and raw. This wasn't just money grudges, it was personal, deliberate nastiness. With shaky hands, I saved the video, anger turning into resolve. I hesitated for a second. This was my brother. Could I really turn him in? But this went past family drama. Ethan had stepped over the line into crime. I called Aunt Clara for advice. Her voice was soft but steady, saying if I didn't make Ethan answer for this now, he'd never learn. Protecting him wasn't kindness, it was letting him slide. Her words grounded me. With firm determination, I filed a police report the next morning, handing over the footage as proof. My family's fury blew up. A flood of angry voicemails hit my phone, calling me spiteful, heartless, a traitor. But under their rage was panic, a sudden understanding that I was for real, no longer under their thumb. Ethan faced real fallout, charges hanging over him unless he paid up. Richard called at last, his voice shaky with forced calm, asking what it'd take to drop the charges. I said right away, $33,000, the exact repair cost. He snapped that it was blackmail. I replied coldly, surprising myself with the steel in my voice, that it was consequences. Ethan trashed my home, and he either pays or faces the charges. His call. He hung up quick. The next morning, a transfer hit my account, exactly $33,000, labeled bitterly as final payment. Despite their clear resentment, victory surged through me, not for the cash, but because I'd finally made them see their actions had a price. Ethan's petty vandalism didn't break me. It solidified my new freedom. No longer tied down by their selfish demands, I started taking my life back. Standing alone in my fixed apartment doorway, I took a deep breath, tasting the bittersweet win. Yeah, my family had betrayed me, hurt me, pushed me to the edge, but they'd accidentally set me free. And now, finally, I could build a life on my own terms, answering just to myself. After Ethan's vandalism, my family's silence was deafening. Days stretched into weeks with no contact, no mad messages, no begging pleas. At first, it felt like a break, but soon it turned into a heavy, constant reminder of what I'd lost. Linda and Richard had picked sides, and once again, I wasn't it. Then the rumors kicked off. Aunt Clara called late one night, her voice low with urgency, saying Linda was talking, telling everyone I'd ditched them, that I was trying to leave my parents homeless. My heart dropped. "That's absurd," I whispered, gripping my phone tighter. They gave me no option. Clara calmed me gently, saying she knew, but others didn't. They thought I was selfish, that I'd cut off my family out of greed. The accusation stabbed deep in my gut. Linda and Richard were rewriting the story, making me the bad guy, their victim act complete. My years of quiet sacrifice, countless skipped vacations, delayed dreams, personal goals on hold, were being wiped out like they never happened. I paced my apartment, restless, pain turning into a fierce need to take back my voice after years of quiet obedience. I was done letting others write my story. With purpose, I sat at my laptop, fingers racing over the keys as I typed a detailed Facebook post. I spilled it all: the monthly mortgage payments, Ethan's tuition and recklessness, Chloe's endless demands, even the damage Ethan caused. Every sacrifice, every buck, every bit of silent resentment flowed onto the screen. My hands shook as I hit post, letting years of bottled-up hurt loose into the world. Within minutes, comments rolled in, reactions fast and split. Some were shocked and sympathetic, appalled I'd been used so long. Others chewed me out, saying I shouldn't air private family stuff online. Then came Linda's raging voicemail. How dare I shame them like this? I had no right. Her anger lit something fierce in me. I called back right away, saying she had no right. She'd lied to everyone, branded me selfish, a villain, just to save face after all I'd done. She hissed that I'd abandoned them, all because they chose to help my siblings who needed it more. I corrected her, voice trembling, that they abandoned me when they decided my work meant nothing, that they'd raised Ethan and Chloe on entitlement instead of responsibility, and now they were paying for it. She whispered coldly that I'd ruined our family. I said softly that no, she did that herself. I hung up, heart racing, tears blurring my eyes. Guilt twisted in me, sharp and stubborn. Had I really wrecked my family by refusing their betrayal? Was it wrong to stand up for myself, demand respect at last? A knock pulled me from my spiraling thoughts. I opened the door to Aunt Clara, worry deep in her face. Without a word, she hugged me tight, giving the unconditional support I'd craved. She said softly that my post changed everything. Some relatives finally saw the truth now. Linda had buried my help all these years, and they had no clue. I sighed heavy, relief mixed with sadness, asking if it even mattered anymore. Clara insisted gently, squeezing my hand, that it did. My voice mattered. I deserved credit for all I'd done. Linda and Richard chose lies, but that didn't mean I had to stay in their shadow. Her words hit deep, sowing seeds of strength in my worn-out heart. Slowly, the pain started to ease, replaced by careful hope. I wasn't hiding anymore, wasn't silent. The truth was messy, raw, but mine. Days later, my phone buzzed out of nowhere. A short, bitter text from Chloe. Thanks a lot. Everyone hates us now. Hope you're proud. I stared at it, feeling oddly distant. I'd spent so long chasing their approval, craving their acceptance no matter the cost. But now, standing in the wreckage of our bond, I saw their approval was never real. It always had strings, sacrifices, conditions. I replied calm and sure, typing that I was done apologizing for their choices, that maybe now they'd learn some responsibility. She didn't answer. Weeks passed, and the harsh words from far-off relatives slowly died down. Linda and Richard struggled without my money, forced into part-time jobs and facing debts they'd dodged for years. Ethan kept up his irresponsible streak, dodging accountability, while Chloe drifted, mad but unwilling to change. Meanwhile, my life bloomed quietly. For the first time, my choices were mine alone. At last, I was free. Not just from money ties, but emotionally. I'd faced the ugly truth, survived my family's betrayal, and come out stronger. Through it all, I'd found a strength I didn't know I had. Linda and Richard thought leaving me nothing would crush me, but they'd accidentally given me the best gift, the guts to choose myself. 6 months later, my family's toxic grip finally faded from my daily life. It wasn't simple at first. Silence haunted me like a ghost, reminding me of every broken tie, every lost link. But bit by bit, the sharp sting of betrayal dulled, replaced by something sweeter, knowing I'd finally broken free. I threw myself into my career, landing a promotion with a corner office and a salary I'd once only dreamed of. For the first time, my paycheck was all mine. No mortgage payments draining my security. No late-night transfers bailing out Ethan's latest mess or Chloe's random wants. Each dollar stood for freedom, proof that picking myself wasn't selfish. It was essential. With that new financial freedom, I booked a 2-week trip to Italy, something I'd put off forever out of guilt over spending on myself. Standing on a balcony overlooking Florence's glowing skyline at sunset, I felt a deep sense of release wash over me. For the first time in years, joy wasn't dimmed by duty or guilt. Back home, I joined a hiking group, finally taking back the weekends I'd lost to family chaos. On one hike, I met Ryan, whose bright smile and kind words soothed my still-mending wounds. His steady support filled the gap my family left, showing me I deserved real love. Months passed calmly until one cold November night brought a surprise knock. I opened the door to Aunt Clara, in her favorite sweater, holding 2 steaming coffees. Without a word, she stepped in and hugged me tight. She whispered she was proud of me, tears in her eyes, saying I deserved every bit of happiness I could grab. She spoke softly, saying Linda and Richard still blamed me for everything, that they wouldn't change, but I'd grown stronger. I'd picked myself, and that took guts. I admitted quietly, my throat tight with emotion, that I still thought about them, not because I regretted leaving, but because it still hurt knowing they never loved me like I loved them. Clara squeezed my hand gently, saying sometimes family isn't blood. It's who really sees your worth. Her words sank in deep, filling an emptiness I hadn't noticed, lingered. As we talked late into the night, swapping stories and laughs, I finally got it. Family isn't just blood, but those who truly value and respect you. In the weeks after, whispers from distant relatives sketched a grim picture of Linda and Richard's life. Linda worked early shifts at a diner, exhaustion carved into her face, while Richard took a tough job at the local hardware store, pushing past what his age could handle. Ethan had quit his latest gig, still dodging responsibility, and Chloe was stuck chasing her endless dream of being an Instagram star that'd never pan out. On Christmas Eve, instead of stewing in regret or bitterness alone, I invited close friends over to celebrate friendship and freedom. Aunt Clara came too, smiling like she knew something, watching me step into a life I never thought I deserved. As night fell and the guests left, I stood alone, gazing at Portland's city lights. The pain of betrayal lingered like a fading scar, but it had shaped me into someone stronger, someone not afraid to claim my own worth. Linda and Richard tried to punish me by cutting me out of their will, but their betrayal gave me something priceless: my freedom. In the end, their rejection was my biggest liberation. They left everything they had to Ethan and Chloe, but they gave me the chance to finally choose myself. What would you have done in my place? Would you have kept supporting your family at the cost of your own happiness? Or would you have walked away, even if it meant losing them for good? I'd love to hear your thoughts.